Do you want me to? Oh, oh yeah, for sure. Thank you, Wyatt. Good morning. It's really loud. Can you hear me? Oh, thank you. What would I do with that, Earl? To remind me of the important function. Good morning and welcome to the Vashon Island Unitarian Universalists. My name is Marilee Runyon. I use she, her pronouns, and I will be your service leader today. If you are visiting, please participate as you feel comfortable. You're invited to stay and join us in conversation following the service with the treats back there. Our congregation is committed to individual freedom of belief, welcomes diversity, seeks to promote a sense of community, and fosters religion which enriches the spirit. We are a mostly lay-led community strengthened and enriched by weaving together the volunteer contributions of members and friends. Our community is supported and guided by our minister, Reverend Victoria Poling. Excuse me. We acknowledge that we are on the traditional homelands of the Swabash Coast Salish Native people. The Puyallup people have lived on and stewarded these lands since the beginning of time, and they continue to do so today. We recognize that this land acknowledgement is one small step toward true allyship, and we commit to uplifting the voices, experiences, and histories of the indigenous people of this land and beyond. As Unitarian Universalists, we honor the interdependent web of all existence. We covenant to cherish the earth and all beings by creating and nurturing relationships of care and respect. With humility and reverence, we acknowledge our place in the great web of life, and we work to repair harm and damaged relationships. As we begin our service, please take a couple of breaths to become fully present. Relax and bring your attention into this moment of communal reflection and sharing. I'd like to invite Robbie to share our chalice lighting reading, and I will light the chalice.
Good morning. Waiting by Reverend Marta Valentin. Step into the center. Come in from the margins. No words need be whispered to tell us we are one.
Our opening reading is called The Many Ways We Listen by Reverend Michelle LaGrave. Breathe in slowly now. Breathe out. Breathe in gently now. Breathe out. Listen to your breath. Listen for another's breath. Whether you are here in the sanctuary or at home with a family member or a cat or at the local coffee shop, listen. And now place your hand on your chest, or do so for another if they need and want your help. And again, slowly now, breathe in and breathe out. Some of us hear with our ears the sounds we make, the sounds others make. Some of us hear with our eyes, watch lips and hands and arms and body movements. Some of us hear with our bodies, feel vibrations in the air and on our skins. Slowly now, breathe in, breathe out. Listen in the many ways that you know how. And as we breathe together, some of us on our own, some of us with help, so too do we live together. Gently now, breathe in and breathe out. Together and apart, we are many and we are one. Breathe in, breathe out. Listen in the many ways that you know how, as together we enter into the silence. Amen and blessed be.
Thank you, Robbie and Julia, for your readings. Thank you, Wyatt. I'd have the honor and privilege of introducing our guest speaker, Nikki Wilkes from Journeyman. Nikki Wilkes is a familiar face on Vashon Island, having grown up amidst its natural beauty and strong community. His journey has been one of both adventure and homecoming, across diverse paths, from exploring the healing arts abroad, coaching youth sports, teaching at Vashon High School, and a stint in college admissions. He's dedicated most of the last decade to mentoring youth with Journeyman. Nikki's passion lies in creating spaces where individuals can connect, grow, and discover their potential. He believes in the power of shared experiences honest reflection, and the resilience of the human spirit. He's grateful to be raising his 3 children with his wife, Caitlin, on the island that is probably the closest thing to home that we can find. Welcome, Nikki.
Hey, everybody. So I have my oldest son, Maverick, up here to help for one particular part of our reflections. But I'll start by saying, feels like an honor and a privilege to be here. It's good to see you up here, Wyatt. I understand the monthly theme is inclusion, and this is a really, I guess, meaningful topic for me. It brings up a lot of personal feelings, but also relevant themes from my work with Journeymen. And so I came up with this clever title that maybe prompted some of you to be excited to hear what I have to say. And the truth is, I don't imagine that I know more about this topic than anybody here. But I do have some experiences on both sides of what it feels like to be included and also what it feels like to not have that feeling. And so I'll speak from that place. Today I'll share some stories, most of them my own, some of them from other people who wouldn't mind, and one in particular that has traveled thousands of years and many thousands of miles to be with us today. And that story is the half-boy story. If it helps for you to hear this story, not through the lens of gender, you could hear it as the half-girl story or the half-child story. I heard it first as the half-boy story, and it's connected to my experience. So I'll share it as I heard it. And it comes to us from the modern day area of Borneo. And that's what I have Maverick here to help with. So whenever you're ready, my friend. Once upon a time, a long, long time ago, or maybe not that long ago at all. Maybe it's right now, but there was a village. And in this village, like many other villages, children are born. But this child was born as a half child, a half boy, right down the middle. A left half, a left eye, a left arm, a left leg, a left body, and yet nothing over here. And as you might imagine, this attracted quite a bit of attention. And the hut where the birth took place soon had a line wrapping all the way around the village of all the people who wanted to see this phenomenon. They were so curious. And as the people waited, as the villagers waited in this line, screams could be heard. And at first, it wasn't clear, are these the screams of a boy who knows it's unfortunate circumstance? Or are these screams of horror and confusion from seeing something that makes no sense and yet is so obviously happening? As this child grows up, it is clear how inconvenient and difficult it is. The half boy causes problems simply because of who he is and how he is. Imagine the awkwardness of trying to go about your daily life with only half of a body. The image of a villager hanging clean linens out to dry, and the half boy stumbles down the path and in the clumsiness stirs up mud and kicks it all over the linens. And the villager who spent all day to get these linens nice and clean can only mutter to themselves, not again. Over time, this half boy begins to see how unwelcome he is in his home. His own peers don't want to play with him because he messes up every game. He doesn't get it, and nothing's changing. And finally, he reaches a breaking point. He comes to the edge of the village and looks back at everything he's ever known and decides that enough is enough. And he chooses to leave. Now, the path for a half boy or any half child is not a smooth path. Rather than walking away with confidence, it's more like a stumbled drag. And so the half boy struggles his way down some path, limping and moving his way slowly but surely. And just imagine too that it's a hot day, the sun is out and it's dusty. And after hours of trial and difficulty, his vision starts to fade. He gets blurred sights, and off in the distance, he can see what seems to be like an oasis, maybe water. And it prompts him to keep going. And so he moves faster, squirming, wiggling his way down. And as he approaches what is the side of a riverbank, down the beach, right down the side of the river, he sees another image of a person coming towards him. And this person sort of looks like him. Awkward, clumsy, dragging himself. And as the creature approaches, right, this other person, every part of him braces for battle, right? He gets ready to protect himself. And by the time they get close enough, they're both tense and engage in an epic battle. Immediately, they begin to wrestle and struggle, fighting each other on first impulse. And their fight eventually takes them into the river. Every once in a while, popping up for air, but plunging back down again and approaching drowning, approaching failure, approaching death. And finally, after every ounce of energy is expended in this struggle, when everything else has been given, the half boy emerges and for the first time places 2 feet in the sand. The boy awkwardly, but for the first time, somewhat confidently, moves away from the river. And as he learns to walk, reorients himself to the path from which he came. He makes his way back to the village, but standing at the edge is an elder, 1 foot in and 1 foot out. And the boy stops and looks at the elder. And without saying a word, the elder knows what needs to be said. He says, "Welcome home. I'm so glad to see you. Something special is about to happen. Because you and I, we're different ages. You are young and I am old. And if we return together to the center of the village, the people will start to dance again." And so they take each other's hand and they walk to the center of the village. And sure enough, all the villagers come back and they start to dance. And for many days, they celebrate the return of their child. So that is the story of the half boy. So I have a couple questions. Just to reflect personally, where do you find yourself in the story? Where do you place yourself? Which symbols stand out to you? And does anything trouble you? I love that question. Is there anything you're like, I don't like that part? I first heard this story from Michael Mead, and he likes to say these stories are really old. And if parts trouble us, then there's probably something in there. And finally, this question will kind of guide the rest of what I have to say, but what does the story reveal about inclusion, right? And the path to wholeness? It's really interesting. And does it still provide insights today? The story might be 5,000 or more years old. Maybe it still has something to teach us. So I'm going to share a little bit of my story now. Some of this might be raw. It feels vulnerable to share, but it's important. And I'll start by saying, as in my bio, like I'm very much from this place. I grew up here. I was literally born on the island in the house that my parents built with the help of a midwife, a tradition that my wife still carries on to this day. I'm a fourth generation islander. My children are fifth. And what's interesting about that is I still wonder if that's enough. Like, when do we really get to say we're from Vashon? Right? 5 years, 10 years. It's a funny question, but I wrestle with it, and I'm like, even I wrestle with it. And that will also come up as a theme, right? One of my earliest memories is I was really little, but I was running around barefoot outside of my great grandma Annabelle's house, which you all probably know now as the Vashon Inn, right across from Snapdragon and next to the Methodist Church. And I was getting holly leaves stuck in my feet, and I was pulling them out. And I think she planted them on purpose to keep us contained. Yeah, so early childhood for me was really blissful. I grew up in this village, right? This garden-like experience. And I think that's an experience that a lot of young children feel here. A whole lot of warmth and loving, nurturing energy, a lot of adults who care, who want to show up. And one of my favorite authors, Bill Plotkin, he describes the archetype of that stage of life as the wanderer in the garden. And that's really what I experienced. It was lovely. And that contrasted very significantly with my adolescence, which I think a lot of people also experience. Those same features are suffocating. The benefits of saying, wow, these adults really care about me and they care about what I'm doing and want to keep me safe. As we go into adolescence, those same things feel, I'll say, the opposite of supportive sometimes. And that was my experience. The rift happened for me, the shift from that innocence and the beauty into pain and struggle was really my origin story of homesickness. And so when my parents got divorced, I was about 10, and they sold the house that I was born in. And the divorce was whatever, they probably should have ended their marriage earlier, but selling the house was the real wound. And I didn't know it at the time. It actually took me until 2 or 3 years ago when we built our house here on Vashon that I realized how important it was to feel at home in a place. And when that was taken away from me, a lot of things changed. During adolescence, I learned to numb myself. I checked out in a lot of ways. The parts of my boyhood and I'll say kind of special sensitive side were really inconvenient as a teenager. So I learned to check out. I learned to numb myself. I learned to perform really well. I did well in school, had friends, all these things, right? I checked all the boxes. But deep down, I was really unhappy. And I used pretty unhealthy means to like feel alive. I took unnecessary risks. I ended up hurting myself and hurting people that I cared about. And just to give you an image, for those who know me now, I pretty much exclusively listened to gangster rap music, like a white kid on Vashon. That was it. It was all I listened to. I was obsessed with girls, and I counted the days until I could leave. The other time I did this in my life was counting the days until I could drive, because on Vashon, that was a big ticket to freedom. But the other thing I was counting down was, when do I get to leave this place? And I look back on that and I say, dang, it's not the best way to go out. So my experience leaving home was interesting. I went all the way to the East Coast to go to college, and I went to a small private school. And at first I thought I was going to be really happy there. I played lacrosse. That was a big part of my identity. And so I'm like going out to Baltimore, which is the hotbed of lacrosse in the country. And interestingly, I wasn't accepted or included. I was an outsider. And even more strange, this is part of, I think, my understanding of inclusion, was that the people I expected to accept me were the first ones to reject me. So my teammates saw me as an outsider. I was this random kid from the West Coast. They didn't know me. They didn't know my school. My dad didn't have yachts. And I was like, wow, okay, that's weird. I was trying really hard to fit in, and they were like, no, you're not one of us. And then I turned to the rest of the folks at the school. And interestingly, because I played lacrosse and because the image of a lacrosse player, particularly at the time. If you tracked the news like 15 years ago, you might remember the Duke lacrosse scandal, which was horrific, but it was a bad time to be a lacrosse player. I'll just say, not a popular sport to play. And everyone else at the school didn't want anything to do with me either. They were like, oh, you're one of those lacrosse players. And I was like, dang. And so what I experienced was fascinating. The people that I ended up bonding with some exception, were folks that I never would have expected. And it was primarily the kitchen staff and the folks who worked at the college who were from inner city Baltimore. And these were folks that now I can see, maybe at a soul level, knew what it was like to not be included. And the conversations I would have with these folks when I was like literally getting pasta at the meal hall were those moments of connection that I longed for so deeply. And I was like, wow, Tony actually cares about me. And he works in the kitchen, you know what I mean? Like, but I can feel his presence in it too. How interesting is that? So I ended up leaving that school. I only lasted a year and I transferred. And I'll fast forward a little bit of my story because 2 weeks ago, I went back to the school I transferred to, Chapman, down in Orange County. This is where I met my wife and had a really good experience. But this was the first place that I experienced a sense of brotherhood. And this was the team that I played for down there. It was far less focused on athletics, but the friendships that I formed were profound. Many of them are my best friends to this day. And I was thinking about this word. We use it to describe the college that we went to for those who have been to higher ed or might be interested in it. The word alma mater actually means nurturing mother in Latin. And I finally found my nurturing mother in terms of a place away from home that second time. And I love that. I love etymology and unpacking these words. And I'm grateful that I eventually found it in a place that wasn't here. So shortly after becoming a father, my wife decided she wanted to be a midwife, and it brought us back up to the Northwest. We moved back to Vashon, and shortly after, Alex Craighead and I started talking about some of the challenges that young people were facing here on Vashon. When we were growing up, it was ridiculously common to hear about young people dying. And oftentimes this was like drunk driving, occasionally suicide, drug overdose, and it was really tragic. And we actually had sort of like an unspoken tradition that every year someone from the graduating class was going to die. And I'm like, how weird is that to grow up sort of just like looking around your peer group in a place like Vashon where you know everybody, being like, who's going to die? And I imagine like every community has a version of this too. When I was back east, particularly living outside of Baltimore, it was gun violence. And, you know, when you think about the things that claim our youth lives too early, they're all horrible and similarly difficult to try to address. But Alex and I had an idea. He was teaching in Germany at the time, and I was really orienting in a new way around being a father. And we started to learn about, I want to say, practices and traditions that were not common in modern America, but were really common in thriving indigenous cultures from around the world, particularly mentorship and rites of passage. And 10 years ago, give or take, we were standing around a bonfire and we had just heard about another story. And this one was really hard for us. But it prompted us to say, now's the time. Like, we're gonna stop talking about helping young people. We're gonna do something about it. And we didn't really know what we were doing yet, which is weird, but we knew we needed to do something. So we started learning, we started training, we started reaching out to mentors near and far, and got a lot of support. And we really started with those two things, rites of passage and mentorship. And we were starting with what we knew, which was boys. We knew this because it was our experience, but also because so much of our opportunity to work with youth happened to be with males. So I think about coming home after, leaving for some time, coming back and choosing to engage in this work. And I go back to the story. I came back to the edge of the village, and I did have an elder, actually several standing there for me. But what didn't happen was everybody dancing. Some people were dancing. And I want to go into that a little bit more. What was actually most unsettling was the reflections of my half boy coming back at me. And this is a really interesting experience. But for me, it clicked when I realized that a few dirty looks at Thriftway or one hostile encounter at Strawberry Festival can erase years of personal healing work. I didn't know that, but I felt it. So despite all my connections to this place, all the work I'd done, and how deep my roots here are, I was still struggling with this feeling of belonging. And I'll say I was included. I've always been included here. But I haven't felt like I belong. How strange is that? And now imagine someone with far fewer threads of connections or shallower roots here without the generations of history and what their experience might be like, both leaving the village, but also ever coming home. So I'm going to share a couple of stats. A 2023 survey found that 70% of teenagers ages 13 to 17 say that anxiety and depression are a major problem among people their age. I read a book recently that's really helped guide some of my work called The Anxious Generation. If you haven't heard of it, it's by a fellow named Jonathan Haidt, and it's really, really powerful, alarming even. And it highlights that these issues aren't brand new, but they're getting worse quickly, particularly when you add in social media, digital influence, and some of the things that I'll talk about in a minute. But it's not just for young people. I think a year or two ago, the US Surgeon General declared a loneliness public health crisis, right? I was talking to Catherine about this too, even as we just watched everybody come in, and the importance of having some moments to just connect as people. Watching you just talk and connect and gather, like, it reminds me that this is so crucial for us as human beings to have that connection and to address the loneliness feeling, because it's really big. And I want to share here a quote from a Franciscan friar, someone that's really inspired me, named Richard Rohr. And if you don't know Richard's work, I highly recommend it. And this comes from his book, Falling Upward. It's about the second half of life. Home is another word for the spirit that we are, our true self in God. The self-same moment that we find God in ourselves, we also find ourselves inside God. And this is the full homecoming. Until then, we are homesick, although today most would probably just call it loneliness. I didn't plan to share this, but I'm remembering probably 5 years ago, I was participating in an online course facilitated by my friend Ian, who does a lot of myth and soul work. And there was an Indigenous elder on the call named Pat McCabe. And Pat was recounting a conversation she had with the Coast Salish elder woman. And she was old enough to have an actual memory of talking to her grandmother about the first, I want to say the first white settlers who were showing up on the shores of, at the time, early Canada. And this image is really powerful. So I want to just imagine you're a Coast Salish person. You've lived in this area for thousands of years. Your people have been there for so long. And all of a sudden, these boats show up. And the image that I think that I got, like as a white person, was like these heroic conquistadors showed up, like, we're here, right? But the image was very different. It was like these like weak, diseased, emasculated men coming out of these ships who've been at sea forever, and they need help, like really bad. And the first question that the Indigenous folks asked them was, where are your women? Because it was like all men on the boat, and they were struggling. They like again, disease, like not enough food, all of it. They'd been at sea for so long. And as was the way for a lot of these Indigenous tribes, like they just helped them. They like took care of them for a while. But that first question really stuck with me. Where are the women? And why are you here? Why did you leave home? That image to me actually gave me a lot of insight for my original source of not belonging. In that moment, I realized that my people for generations weren't leaving home because things were really good, right? They weren't like, hey, we have abundance. Like, we're going to leave everything we've ever known. Why would we do that? They left because things sucked. They left because they needed to, probably because they were being persecuted, probably because there wasn't enough food. And that wounding was actually the reason why my people got out here. That gave me some insight into why it's been so hard to belong. So I got some stories and some questions about inclusion. This one's really interesting. Maybe 5 years ago, I got a phone call from a parent about camp. So we run these awesome transformational camps, mostly for boys, but now for youth of all genders. And the call's going pretty typically, right? Tell me about camp. Sure, I'll share a little about camp. And then this question comes up that I never could have prepared myself for. There's a mother on the call. She says, would you say that your program is inclusive? And I was like, yeah, for sure. It's really important for us to make sure that anybody who, in this case, identifies as male can participate and really have a nourishing experience. And she just goes, oh, okay, that's not good for us. Thanks, bye. Hangs up the phone. And I was like, I remember being in my office and like looking at my colleague being like, what? I didn't know that being inclusive could be exclusive. How interesting, right? And deep down, like my heart ached because I thought about the boy. I thought about the possibility, I would say likelihood even, that there was something that might happen at camp for him that his parents couldn't see, that we couldn't see, that was just a part of his experience of what I call divine love that might come through. And in this case, it wasn't going to happen because of this damn word. Excuse my language. That was the first time I realized the power of language, particularly in creating spaces that are truly inclusive and that facilitate belonging beyond just like hot words. This experience is right around the same time that we were running our Circles program at the high school. It's a mentorship group we run usually once a week. We've done it at most of the schools really since we founded. And just to give you a sense of what it is, usually 8 to 15 youth with maybe 2 to 3 adult staff, facilitators and mentors. We engage in the way of counsel, circle process. We often use a talking piece, and it's a place to share authentically in the middle of the school day, which is not common, but it's beautiful. And in one particular group that had been developing a lot of trust over time, one of the things that happened reminded me of the power of the work that we're doing, because one of the boys chose to come out in front of his peers. And I thought about my experience being in high school because I went to VHS, and I thought there's no way that ever would have happened when I was in school. It was not safe to be gay. It was like, there was just no way that would have happened. And I remember after that group being like, wow, it's working, right? Awesome. So a year later, same circle, different makeup, particularly because every year there's graduates and freshmen come in. And at this point, we had 2 trans male students in the group. And a couple of guys who had been in the group for a while, but hadn't shown up in a while, they came into the room and noticed who was in the circle and immediately reacted. And they just left the room. And I knew, I had a sense this might happen and just be at least uncomfortable, but the way it went down didn't feel good. And so I followed up in a conversation with the group, one in particular, one of the guys who just refused to participate because I think we were being inclusive. And I learned a lot. I learned a lot about his value system. I learned a lot about what felt non-negotiable in this process, but I also learned that it wasn't going to be reconcilable. that by choosing to be a space where we were including, I want to say, folks who are choosing to be there for the right reason and are actually living into that, he was a no. And again, it prompted me to question, like, is this working? Are we doing it right? Really interesting that it was the same circle, just a year apart. So I want to share a different story. A year ago, actually, no, let's just start with an imagination for a sec. Imagine there's a room of 100 high school boys. In this case, too, there's a few teachers, but everybody in the room is male. And imagine that I'm speaking to them and I ask a question. Raise your hand if you're proud to be a boy or a man today. Just imagine that I asked that question. How many do you think would raise their hand? Half or less? 5? Okay, so now I'm going to transplant this and say, imagine that I'm doing this in the city of Seattle. I don't know where you imagined it before, maybe on Vashon, but city of Seattle. And I asked that question. Do you think more or less? Less. Maybe more? So I actually did this. I was speaking at a young men's conference, and I like to steer into some uncomfortable conversations because I think there's real learning there. And so I asked this question, and I think out of about 100, maybe 6 or 7 raised their hand. And then I asked a follow-up question. Now imagine there's some girls and young women, basically some non-males in the space. How do you think your answer would change? Nobody raised their hand, except for one kid. Finally raised his hand. And I was like, are you raising your hand because you would or because you want to say something? He said, no, I want to say something. And he finally spoke up and he just said, look, it's really hard right now to feel good about who I am as a boy. But he's like, I think it would be even harder without just boys in the room, because he's like, I think it just makes you feel afraid, like I'm doing something wrong. And it was really vulnerable. He didn't have like all the words for it, but he knew he wanted to speak up about it. And it was so fascinating to me. And so I share that story because to me, there was a question that came from it. It wasn't conclusive, but the question was like, is it a good thing that so many boys feel really insecure in their identity right now? And maybe more importantly, where will they go to find belonging? Where will they go to find that belonging? What I notice is that in like progressive America, there's a real acceptance that men have some serious work to do. And I'm all in on this. We really need to be unpacking our privilege. We need to repent. We need to dismantle the systems of oppression. And it's crucial work. But I also think about the millions of boys who are not ready to bear that burden. They're literally children. And they're navigating the space very confused and without great role models a lot of the time. And there's this other term that's come up a lot recently, which I call cancel culture. A lot of people call cancel culture. And underneath that is actually just a really intense fear of failure that's preventing a lot of boys from engaging in life, but also preventing folks from showing up in the work at all. It doesn't feel safe to fail. And it's unfortunate. So I see like this interesting thing happening. Boys and men have become pretty easy targets. I've looked at how this plays out in terms of media and who they are looking to as role models. And it's not great. But I'll actually just go back to the story for a second. What if in the half boy story, the boy never encounters his other half and has that fight? But what if he finds another village of other halflings and they give him a weapon and they make him feel powerful for the first time? What happens then? And is that happening right now? So the first time I heard this story, I heard Michael propose that when the boy comes back and when the people start dancing, the village actually births the new religion, right? It's a different way of being immediately upon this return. And it's a story of renewal that shows up in initiation stories often. That rites of passage work is not just about the individual growth and transformation, but the village actually experiences a renewal. So I wasn't raised religious. I actually rejected any form of religion or spirituality for a long time. A lot of that had to do with family trauma, but I was also hyper rational, and also because in my life, nobody was dancing. So when we started Journeymen, it was definitely not religious, and we wanted to be inclusive, and all these things are still true. But we did realize that a path to spirituality felt very important. And so we often used nature connection and really an expansive view of the more than human world as a way to bring that together. And as time has gone on, I've gotten more and more comfortable with this word, religion. I'm glad it's still in your charter, because when we break that word down, it literally means to tie together. I think in a modern context, we think hyper-structured belief system, but underneath it, the root of that word actually means to bond or to tie together. And I think that's really important today. There's another Rohr quote that stands out to me. And I think this is where the real work is. But it's filling what Rohr calls the God-sized hole in each of us with divine love. And I would say that the children in us and around us really need a dancing village right now. And so I'll go back to the story and ask, where did you see yourself in the story? Sometimes I see myself as actually the people lined up outside the hut. And it's uncomfortable, but that's still part of me. I still snicker and criticize and point fingers and complain about the fairies, about kids today, all of the things. But I think what I'm moving towards is actually learning to dance again, and maybe working my way towards the edge of the village so I can one day be an elder to welcome some people back. I'm really inspired by the folks that I get to work with, especially the youth. We're using these really old ways to wrangle new manifestations of old wounds. Sitting in council, for example, we learn to belong, literally to be with our longing. We also learn to be with each other in a way that opens the heart, calms the mind. We're remembering how to see past disagreement and difference, to dig deep into and occasionally through that fertile soil of our values. Something there. On rare occasions, I think we get to meet at the level of soul. And it's from that place that I believe we can make some true progress. Dancing is risky. It's my experience. And I think it's necessary today. I'll finish with one of my favorite quotes. The wound is the place where the light enters you. It's by Rumi. Coming home is an immediate reflection of our wounding, both at a personal level, but also at a village level. And I'll just close by saying I'm so grateful to be in this community with so many people who care, who show up, who do the work, and who are inching our way closer to be a village of dancing people who can welcome our young people home. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Nikki, for those more than thoughtful words. Let's hold a moment of contemplation and worship, an old English word that means to consider things of worth in a generous and abundant silence.
Thank you, Nikki, again.
This is original song.
Thank you.
Please join as you feel comfortable in singing There Is a Love. The words are printed on the back of the laminated order of service and in the inside of your gray hymnal, if you happen to have one of those.
There's a love
We will now resume the recording as we finish the service. Our congregation engages beyond our walls for peace, social and economic justice, freedom of belief, and protection of our planet and its inhabitants. Once a month, we contribute the financial offering to a regional, national, or international organization that aligns with our values. This week's offering supports Journeyman. And I'm glad. We've learned firsthand the important work that they are doing, and we encourage you to donate generously for today's plate collection. I guess the greeters are going to come up and get the baskets. What do you want the checks to say? Pardon me? What do you want the checks to say? Oh, the checks should be written to Journeyman. Thank you, Robbie. As we receive our offering, please join in singing "We Give Thanks." The words are printed on the back of the laminated order of service and on the inside of the hymnal. Thank you.
And I don't have the music for this one. I just have some rough chords, so bear with me.
We can do it. We know this one.
Okay. All right. Goes far away for the time we share, His love and care. Oh, we give thanks for this precious day. Oh, we give thanks for this precious day. We're all gathered here and those far away. For the time we share with love and care. Oh, we give thanks for this precious day.
Yeah, we can do it. We have a final reading.
This reading is called A Spirited Manifesto by Leslie Hazelton. And as I was reflecting on it, I was looking around this room at the circles that are here, formal ones, open ones, the circle of community. So circles are many things. A classic Zen exercise is the Enso, the circle hand-drawn in a single fluid brushstroke. It's close to perfect, but never there. If perfection is what you want, you can produce it anytime by using a compass, a computer, but the Enso defies such mechanistic precision. Indeed, it's often incomplete, left slightly open, as though an invitation to everything beyond it. And each one is different, never the same circle twice. You can see the hairs of the brush in the drag of the ink on paper, Trace the fluidity of the moment when the stillness of meditation was released in one rapid stroke. Sense the calm grace of the artist. The beauty of the Zen circle lies precisely, or more precisely, imprecisely, in its imperfection. That is what speaks to us and draws us in. A perfect circle is uninteresting, a closed system containing nothing, while an imperfect one vibrates with warmth. It invites us into the moment of its creation, into that single deep exhalation as the hand arced through the air, the brush over the paper. It's open, human, fallible, an expression that is of soul.
This is called To Make New Shapes by Reverend Rod Richards. May we practice sacred flexibility, letting go of geometric purity when it comes to our circles, so that we are unafraid to draw them wider, stretch them longer, and find joy in the task of rearranging. Let us be fearless in our willingness to make new shapes, so that we may be accountable to people who have not found us yet, so we may welcome those who thirst for our healing message, so that we may engage with our people and our partners the work before us, to save our lives as citizens and human beings. Go forth and make some new shapes.
Our formal service is now over. I'd like to give special thanks to Nikki, Wyatt, Julia, Robbie, Catherine for tech, setup group number 3, and everyone for participating in today's service. And I'd like to particularly welcome Nikki's family. It's so nice to have you all here. So now announcements. We will now continue with VIUU announcements. If anyone has an announcement related to a VIUU activity, please line up to your right, come forward and tell us about it.